Okay, so today we'll be doing Bitcoin in emerging markets. Um, and so just like little disclosure, this is like an undergrad club, and yeah, you can read it on your slides, but we'll just start. So why is Bitcoin important in emerging markets? So Bitcoin is a tool for financial stability. And we'll touch upon on how people have been using it, and then also how governments have pushed towards Bitcoin regulations. Um, but yeah, Bitcoin has become a tool for financial stability in many emerging markets, in countries where currencies are unstable or where banking systems are not accessible to many. Bitcoin offers a decentralized alternative, and it lets us explore how this looks in practice, such as in case studies like El Salvador and also Argentina, where and then particularly El Salvador, they've recently adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender, which is reshaping their economy. Um, so yeah. So we'll start with our first case study, which is El Salvador, and how the government has sort of implemented initiatives for Bitcoin to become more prominent on their economy. So the first is Chivo Wallet, and here, the Salvadorian government launched its own digital wallet app called Chivo to facilitate Bitcoin transactions. The wallet allows citizens to store, receive, and spend Bitcoin with no transaction fees. And to encourage adoption, the government offered $30 worth of Bitcoin to every citizen who downloaded and registered on the app. So here's just like an example of a digital wallet app that the government launched. Um, for our second government initiative, it's Bitcoin ATMs. So you can see it on the picture, but pretty much the government sold over 200 Bitcoin ATMs nationwide and internationally, to facilitate easy conversion between Bitcoin and USD. And this ATMs are integrated with the Chiva wallet we talked about before, allowing users to withdraw cash directly. So this is really useful, especially when we talk about people trying to send money abroad, so like from El Salvador to the US or otherwise, and then also being able to make it liquid by withdrawing it as cash is really helpful for people as well. Um, our third government initiative is the Bitcoin bond initiative. So you'll see it on the title of this JP Morgan news, but basically the government launched the concept of Bitcoin bonds, also known as volcano bonds, to raise 1 billion for building a Bitcoin city and investing in Bitcoin mining infrastructure powered by renewable energy, specifically geothermal energy. Yeah. So we actually have Sal today with us, and he'll be our mini guest speaker. So he is from El Salvador and he has a lot of experience with Bitcoin. So he'll just share his experience with us and sort of how Bitcoin looks like in the daily lives of people in El Salvador. Yeah.
Thank you, Rafa. It's excited to be here. My name's Sal. I met Bill, which is great. Um, I don't know if you all had the opportunity to read the article that was sent in the email, I believe, right yesterday,
Yeah.
that Professor Sarah Krebs wrote. She's a faculty here at Cornell, and she wrote about Salvador's big Bitcoin promise. Super informative, and really not much I can add, or maybe some color to it, but I think she hits it right in the nail as far as sort of where Bitcoin is within El Salvador and sort of the promise of it, right? Like what is it that I think El Salvador hopes to achieve by having adopted Bitcoin as national currency. I think that the biggest sort of color I could add to this would be that you can't you to really understand why El Salvador adopted Bitcoin. I think it will be helpful to understand a little bit of where we come from, right? El Salvador, it's had a 12-year long civil war. It ended in 1992. About 80,000 people were murdered. About 30,000 more remain missing. and it suffered from a pretty brutal civil war conflict. So within that context, right, you can imagine all the infrastructure that was the suffer during that 12-year civil war conflict. And I think that after years of democratic leadership from the right-wing party Arena, the left-wing party FMLN, there was very slow, very gradual progress. And I think that, when President Bukele, who was the one that led the adoption of Bitcoin El Salvador, when he was elected president, he was able to sort of capture the disenchantment of people, survivors of the Civil War, the new generations that were born after the Civil War ended. There's an entire generation that does not remember, right, that period of time. And I think that President Bukele is able to sort of capture time as a multi-generational asset, right? That's probably the best way of thinking of time. And I think Bitcoin lends itself obviously to those that have very low time preference. It's something that can be very helpful. So I think, Salvador, we're seeing a case of a president that's on the younger side compared to prior presidents, and that is able to sort of capture the disenchantment, the discontent of this newer generation post-Civil War, and is able to offer an alternative path, hope, so to speak, beyond just the typical IMF loans that are very normal, any type of emerging market country, not just limited to the Americas continent. And, within that context of hope, that what Bitcoin offers, right, there's obviously many, many questions that are critical to ponder. And I think that Professor Sarkis makes a fantastic sort of analysis of, okay, there's a bunch of Bitcoin ATMs. There's definitely some circular economies kicking in Bitcoin Beach, Salvador. There's some momentum, but it is certainly not as momentous as I think true Bitcoiners will hope, right? And I think that's sort of where Professor Krebs really makes a good point of, well, this really might just take time. And also El Salvador, because it became dollarized, I believe it was in 2000 or 2001, if I'm not mistaken, around that time. We don't suffer maybe the volatility that the Argentine country suffers, right? So that could be like maybe a big difference between both countries. And also, I think when it comes to El Salvador, something that is very, very promising is, now that it has been adopted at a nation state level, what happens, right? How do we custody this? I think Bukele announced, and it's a public Bitcoin address. You can check it. I think the government is buying 1 Bitcoin a day since years now. And he also made a huge initial purchase. So what happens to this, right, with the transition of power, right? When Bukele's when his presidency comes to an end, what happens to the Bitcoin, right? Number two is, how is the Bitcoin currently being custodied, right? Those are like real considerations, like how does this work, right? It's never been done before. So El Salvador definitely has a lot of promising questions that will be answered through action. Not everything will be perfect, but I think the intent is obviously to offer an alternative into a mechanism of freedom beyond just what the IMF offers, which is very typical of this sort of, cut, save, and pay us back, right? So El Salvador, for those that have not been there before, is definitely a beautiful country. Within an hour or so, you can be in a mountain, or you can go down to the beach, or you can go be in a city. Everything is it's very close, and the people are just very. There's a warmth to it. So Bitcoin definitely provides an alternative for these folks looking to reconstruct a country that suffered a 12-year civil war that was brutal for everyone. And I think it's to be determined. I would agree here with Professor Sarah Krebs that I think that it's definitely very good actions taken at first by adopting it, by creating laws around it. Now it's just a matter of giving it that time, that low time preference to see the evolution of it. And obviously being a leader in the nation state space, El Salvador obviously has a lot of eyes put on it, on how these answers get, how these answers manifest. So definitely a lot of promise, and I think we as Salvadorians and just in general as Bitcoiners, we really await to see how this process unfolds. Happy to take any questions too. I mean, it's
Yeah.
but again, I know we're seeing Argentina afterwards, so I don't want to
Yeah.
take too much time.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So I feel like Bitcoin doesn't do that much.
Still loading, still loading.
Let me start,
It doesn't
Oh, it's coming up. Mine is not coming up.
feel like the big gap is to the governments in terms of like paying debt, repaying debt super fast. And I feel like, yeah, the impact is restricted to the government. And I've read several articles and watched videos saying that, well, Bitcoin's adoption for Salvador citizens is kind of lagging behind or struggling. So what are your thoughts about that?
That's a phenomenal perspective, and I almost would like to say that Bitcoin, adopted Bitcoin as currency in El Salvador is definitely ahead of its time. It's and I mean that in a very empowering, in a positive way. I myself am Salvadorian, so I want what's best for my country. But in Professor Krebs' analysis, she talks about how just a few years ago, there was safety in El Salvador was very low. Right. We had a massive gang problem. We had a absolutely. I mean, it was just security was not where it is now. And I think President Bukele was able to really prioritize that through his first presidency. So adopting Bitcoin is sort of an aspirational goal. I will frame it as such. And I think that, to Professor Krebs' article, people still prefer the dollar coin, right? So like that's, it's a very, like she says, we don't even use that in the USA anymore. But in El Salvador, that's big currency, right? The dollar bill. So within that context, obviously, paying in Bitcoin might not be adopted by everyone fast when we're still preferring dollar coins, like quarter coins. But I do think it's an aspirational step that at least helps the population see beyond the regular structures, the typical structures of the IMF that tend to be repressive, that tend to benefit only specific folks, within government and private sector. And I think the intent here, and from the interviews from President Bukele and everything, the intent seems to be to remind people, Salvadorians, hey, we can become agents of change. There is this technology, and you're right, like El Salvador's, there's a vested interest at the government level of adopting more Bitcoin quickly as the game theory plays out, right? But the regular person buying a lunch at the corner store, the corner cafe, might not have satoshis to pay, rather might have two $1 coins, right? And it might take some time for us to get where we have this big use of Bitcoin in El Salvador, but I think aspirationally we're heading in that direction, and definitely with President Bukele's actions, it's a step forward towards that end. That's a great question.
I'm curious, do you still have families at Salvador?
Of course,
And are they using Bitcoin or?
some of them do, the younger generation for sure, not so much the older. But so you even see the generational gap.
Yeah,
Right?
sure.
But yeah, absolutely. I have a family that's younger that they actually kept their $30, in Bitcoin for the Chivo wallet, and they're active users of it. They're more, they now have buying in the ecosystem. They're more interested about Bitcoin. They're interested in learning how, what does it mean at larger scales. We talk about Bitcoin, so it is there. It has awoken that curiosity, which is also another side effect,
Yeah.
right? of just, you're not gonna get everyone's interest, but you're gonna get some, which is a lot better than what it was a few years ago. There was no interest. Yeah. It's a great question. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
I have a question actually. Okay, so I think different countries implement sort of increased use of Bitcoin increases due to different reasons. So like Argentina might be to protect themselves from hyperinflation and protect the value of their money. In El Salvador, I know you mentioned sort of two key points. So like in this way, reminding people about like this sort of like financial freedom. But also just I know you mentioned the IMF. So I was wondering, do you think, because usually the IMF is in emerging markets, it's for financing or acquiring debt. Do you think Bitcoin can be a financial strategy to fund necessities? Do you see it as in a way that it could be a mechanism to do so? Because I know we mentioned like the Bitcoin bond initiative, where pretty much it attracted investment. Like what's your view on that?
Yeah, well, on a high level, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Bitcoin can become that.
Yeah.
I think we're maybe ahead of our time when it comes to trying to speak the language of the market, Wall Street, right?
Mhm.
I think that, we just recently, I believe, what month is today? Just this year, January, February, in the US, BlackRock was authorized to have a spot Bitcoin ETF.
Yeah.
BlackRock is one of the biggest institutions in Wall Street financial markets. So I think it lends legitimacy to the case of Bitcoin, right? When Bukele adopted this, if it's my recollection, I believe Larry Fink was still openly doubting Bitcoin's promise.
Yeah.
So in a matter of what, 2-3 years, Larry Fink has made a big pivot, and he himself acknowledges that. So I think that Bukele, by authorizing the purchase of it and having that in the nation's coffers, it's definitely positioning the country to get to that part that you're saying. It can eventually, use Bitcoin to finance whatever sort of infrastructure he might have relied power in with the IMF, right?
Mhm.
Even right now, you have IMF openly sort of saying, and I believe I saw a video a couple of weeks ago, an IMF official saying, yeah, we're currently still in talks with President Bukele, El Salvador, but we'll like more guardrails within their Bitcoin strategy, right?
Yeah.
And if you read between the lines, if you read the signal, they're not fully too happy with it, right? So I definitely think Kelly got it right as far as buying Bitcoin early at the nation state level. But that does not necessarily mean that traditional finance is going to flock to it, right? Just because there needs to be some legitimacy in the street, in the Wall Street, and obviously BlackRock. And I believe it's like north of 10, close to a dozen of spot Bitcoin ETFs that have been approved. I definitely think that it's only going to, frankly, prove Bukele's strategy accurate. It's going to prove it right. It's a great question.
Great. If we don't have any more questions, should we move on? Yeah. Okay, well, good. Okay. So now we'll just thank you so much, Sal. Yeah.
I'm always here, of course. Thank you.
Argentina. So I'll just mention 3 main ways on why people in Argentina are using Bitcoin. The first one is everyday savings. Argentina's inflation is just really, really high. On the news, you can see like January 11, 2024, it hit 211% in 2023. So that's like the fastest gain in 3 decades. So it's huge. And so people want to really store the value of their savings and protect it from inflation. So they convert their Argentine pesos into Bitcoin to avoid losing purchasing power as the peso devalues quickly against other currencies. And so this is like the case of Argentina, which experiences hyperinflation, but this could also just apply to other countries that also have currencies that experience inflation. It's usually other countries in Latin America as well. Our second use is sending money abroad. So Bitcoin is used by Argentines to send and receive remittances without going through traditional banking systems, which often have high fees and restrictions. So this is just related to what Ella showed on our last meeting. If you guys remember, when someone tries to send money across the world to another person, there's a lot of intermediaries in between that accrue fees, and so it becomes really expensive and really slow. So Bitcoin is a way to using Bitcoin is a way that we can avoid that. So for example, platforms like Bitso and Ripio provide low cost and fast ways to convert Bitcoin into local currency or other crypto assets. So it's like sort of that the video and the example she showed, it's like you don't have to touch the peanut if you are allergic to peanuts. So if people still want to receive money in their local currency, they're using Bitcoin as sort of like they skip all the intermediaries and they still get the money in their local currency. So it's a way that it helps people save money and save time as well. And then the third one's just buying and selling goods. So some businesses I saw the news and there's like cafes that are accepting Bitcoin, and it's sort of like what we're trying to do with CTB now. But yeah, it's a way that people can just approach businesses where they accept Bitcoin and are able to pay directly for goods and services in Bitcoin as the currency. Yeah. And then I'll just pop up some pros and cons of Bitcoin in emerging markets. So some of the pros are financial inclusion. So in the beginning, we mentioned one of the two main reasons of countries being more into Bitcoin is when not a lot of people have access to banking systems. So Bitcoin really allows for that financial inclusion as well as protect against inflation like Argentina and remittances efficiency. And then some of the cons, it's volatility, regulatory pushback. So like we can see like the difference between El Salvador and Argentina, where it's like, whereas in El Salvador, the government's really pushing towards the use of Bitcoin. On Argentina, it's the opposite. So that has a huge effect on also how people use it. And then the third one's tech infrastructure limits. So that really relates to regulatory pushback. So we saw that the Bitcoin bond in El Salvador was used to build infrastructure for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. So that really has a correlation there. And then we just want to do this a little more interactive. So for the second part of the session, we'll do an interactive debate where we can split up into two groups. And group A will have to defend the thesis Bitcoin is a positive force in emerging markets. And then group B will defend Bitcoin presents significant risks in emerging markets. So we'll just go random, I guess. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We can do 3, 3. Okay. There are people online. Yeah. Ella, do you think anyone here wants to join the debate?
Want to join the debate, or are you just listening? I know it's kind of late for you there. Yeah, I think Rafa maybe we'll just keep it in person.
All right. Yeah, we can do 3, 3. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, sure. So we can all be group A and group B, and we'll just divide it by time. Okay. Sounds good. Okay. So I guess we'll start with group A. Do we need like 5 minutes to prepare an argument, or are we just ready to go?
I think we can just swing it.
Okay. We'll just wing it. Okay. Amazing. So does anyone want to start us off with a first argument?
Happy to start.
Okay.
All right. So the biggest thing that and go back to, thanks for, by the way, thanks for doing this debate. I think the the biggest positive force for an emerging economy or an ascending nation, as the term is now, is Bitcoin provides an option beyond just the IMF or that type of private support. And that can have huge implications when it comes to agency, empowerment, and leadership for any country. Now the nuances of how to implement that, we'll leave that for Group B. But I think that's probably the biggest way that an emerging market leader or leadership can have when it comes to Bitcoin. That's really not offered by any other technology as of now. Bitcoin is as pristine as it will ever get, and I think that can be leveraged. And obviously there's Salvador, President Mileo from Argentina has also met with Bukele. We have some folks from the Middle East that have met with Bukele as well, based on Bukele's Twitter X account. So that I would love to hear folks' perspectives, because it's not just limited to Latin America, it's also Southeast Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. We'd love to sort of get that insight from folks in the room. We have Mexico. Well, I know that there's some folks in Mexico's legislator, I forgot the name, which is very spoken about Bitcoin's potentials for Mexico. So we'd love to get perspective.
I actually have a thought about, I've read that in Argentina, people tend to use like Tether stablecoin on Tron blockchain, and I'm almost scared that people would prefer to use stablecoin instead of Bitcoin. And I don't know how we will go in the future, but I feel like there's a competition between these two systems, and people are more used to like dollar in general, any form of dollar. So that's not so much of an argument, but I think that's interesting to see how people react when they're offered the choice. You have the choice between Bitcoin and stablecoins.
So do you think there's a risk of introducing Bitcoin, or that's a?
I think Bitcoin would be great for emerging market and for the world, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like using Bitcoin wallet with like on the Lightning Network could be more complex than just hot wallet on Tron sending tethers and USDC. So I'd like to see where it goes.
Sure. I agree. Thoughts? That's actually a really interesting.
Yeah. So it's kind of all about what you two just discussed. So first of all, Sal have said about, I think it really is, because we're in the US and comparatively the dollar is more stable. We don't know the currency in other countries. So I think what Bitcoin provides is something other than an issued currency by other governments. It gives a backup plan for people to fall on. And even if we're talking about US dollars, we don't know when it's next, who they're gonna hit, when they're gonna raise the interest rate or the interest rate. So it is something that's stable that people could trust in. Yeah. And then second point, based on what Mark just said about stable coin and all that, it's still like a work in progress. We've seen how Luna collapse. We see other type of stable coin collapse. But Bitcoin's already established and it's been up there, and its value being the work that it has to be done for a transaction to be hosted. So it is still probably one of the most stable out there. And that's why I'm here for the debate.
Well, that's interesting. And echoing to Yo's point, let me give you a specific example, right? For the El Salvador adopted became dollarized, 99, 2000, someone checking on that around that time. And you go to El Salvador and they want the dollar coins, the quarters, dollar bills. They always put 2001 there. You go. So my original punch wasn't wrong. Now, I believe you guys were around for the stimulus that they sent. Like you in 2008, the first crisis, there was a stimulus sent for US citizens to, I think they got like 2 checks, and then there was COVID. So when when the central bank prints out money for US citizens, do you think Salvadorians get those checks too? Even though we use the dollar? We don't. Those dollars stay at Texas and Arizona and Nevada. They don't make it past, past the countries that have adopted the dollar, right? Like El Salvador. So Bitcoin, to your point, I agree, is something that can ultimately allow that agency to the person who's holding it to hedge against all this risk, right? When is the next COVID? When is going to be the next round of printing money to help for COVID for the next time we bail out banks in 2008? Like, when is that coming? Well, we don't know, but we know that we can store some of our capital, whatever the amount that might make sense to the person, into this asset that's nobody will be able to confiscate it from you, or nobody will be able to print it away, right? So it's a real. I always like using those examples because, particularly, Salvador adopted the dollar, but we don't get those stimulus funds. So what do we
You
get?
get the loss of purchasing power between inflation. Yeah.
There we go.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Bitcoin can really be an empowerment tool in that specific context. What do you think, Frank? We'd love to hear about your opinions on Mexico.
I guess that one of the benefits, big side of Bitcoin for emerging countries is that although they are not necessarily the same, but many emerging countries are also have some degree of authoritarianism in those countries. So Bitcoin offers an alternative for people to like go beyond the government in terms of like financing like free press or like journalists or people that are being politically prosecuted, like the opposition in Venezuela, etc. Like having a tool for them to be financially independent and therefore have tools to advance democracy or like fight against the government injustice, whatever the case is. That's something relevant and that's something that Bitcoin gives them. So that's
Thank you for that. And not only that, there's phenomenal organizations doing that already. I believe one of them is HRF, Human Rights Foundation, led by Alex Blazin, I think. They do exactly what you said, like they support, multiple sort of entities, and one of them is sort of folks that are interested in advancing specific messaging that typically the government tends to suppress, right? So Bitcoin is something that can help protect that sort of human rights perspective. Thank you. That's very informative. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Anything? Don't feel pressure. That's fine. I know Rafa got you. She got opinions too. Thank you. And it is true. Rafa, what do you think?
I think like a huge, well, it touches upon like a lot of different points, but access to global markets. So especially like relating it to the topic of freedom. Um, like I know that it allows, especially in countries where, first of all, not everyone has access to financial markets. So that's like a huge thing because it's like, it's not only certain people, but it's rather like everyone. And then it's also not only certain markets that like maybe like government wants you to access, but it's open to the entire world. So I think that sort of like sense of decentralization and sort of everyone everywhere, it's really key, especially for like the aspect of financial freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, Argentina and how did you regulate Bitcoin? I thought that Millet was somehow related to the Austrian School of Economics. And so I would have thought that you
Yeah.
kind of like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So how is that? Why is that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I feel like theoretically he would maybe have like a mindset that supports Bitcoin, but I think like there's a lot more things that come into play when you are in power as president. So it's not only what you think or your interests, it's like managing the interests of a lot of people and groups to stay in power, especially in economies where there's a lot of political volatility.
I feel like he's capable of crazy and drastic changes.
Yeah.
So maybe it has been like able to
Yeah.
the competition in the currency market, or
Mhm.
well, we'll see.
Yeah, let's see.
The thing with Milei is, like, even if theoretically he needs to agree, like his husband, like the libertarian-ish background, he also wants to dollarize the currency there.
Yeah.
So maybe pushing for both things at the same time is hard, like adopting the dollar and also adopting Bitcoin are things that are hard to pass in Congress, I guess. So I guess we think like this to the dollarize things.
And I believe to your point, I agree with it. I believe there was an article, and I'm trying to find it, but I'll see if I can find it later. Sort of the IMF openly came out more or less sort of saying, hey, you can't do what El Salvador did, and the IMF has a long relationship with Argentina. So that, his political landscape is a lot different. He himself might be a strong-willed person, character at least that we see through TV, but his political reality is very different compared to Bukel's political reality. He has, I mean, the support the support from people, it's extremely high, and he has a lot of supporters through different verticals of the government, which I think that can explain maybe Milei's sort of not rushing right to the way Bukele did. But that's great insights though.
Yeah. I think also maybe like geographical size as well. Like it's easier to like compare Argentina with El Salvador. Like I think it's just like in a way easier to implement changes when it's like smaller. Yeah.
Salvador came back IMF loans recently, or did they manage to get rid of it?
So we have, you know what? I'm not sure. He just submitted the first budget in decades that has no debt for 2025. We'll have it, which is huge.
That's
I
crazy.
believe the last time that this was paid was decades ago. But I'm not sure if it has fully paid off the debt as of this year. But I know for the incoming year, that is a big deal that it is officially be submitted for consideration. And obviously, the Congress has to approve it. It'll be the first budget that no debt will be taken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's, and again, to your point, or the implications of that are, well, with that type of treasury that Bitcoin is part of it, right? Because it's no longer just storing fiat, rather Bitcoin, then that is a fundamental game changer for not just investment in infrastructure, but also for this type of national budgets, right? And different scale, obviously, but if we compare the US budget process, I don't know who's familiar with that, around every winter in this country, there's this big fight in DC, this government shutdown, and the shutdown and everything is because of this debt ceiling that they want to increase, right, to be able to service of that. Again, you have, how sustainable is that, right? That's depends on what you believe. So, but yeah, El Salvador is sort of not asking for ceiling debt increases, rather potentially just no debt at all.
What's the biggest, like before Bukele, what was the biggest organization that provided that for El Salvador?
That provide that
Like that provided
like,
financing, yeah.
right. Yeah,
IMF?
Yeah, but is that?
Okay. Yeah.
And I, and you know, Salvador, of course, yes. Yes,
Okay.
and they're not, I mean, if you look at the statements from the IMF as of recent, they openly don't appreciate Bukel's Bitcoin strategy openly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it goes to the leadership and the smaller scale and everything, right? Bitcoin, Bukele is holding strong, and then so is the IMF. Like, so, you know, they're both sort of at the same
Yeah.
time pass, but there's a public address on the blockchain, on the Bitcoin chain that you can see Bukele, also Bruce buying 1 Bitcoin a day, right? Like that's the signal, right? That's the signal.
Mhm.
Now Argentina, and I like that perspective. I'm not from Argentina, but it's larger scale, more stakeholders, longer relationship around there, so it might be a little harder for him to navigate. We'll see. Time will tell. Now to the good part. The other argument.
Oh, Group B. We're doing Group B. Yeah. We have 10 more minutes. So, Bitcoin presents significant risks in emerging markets.
Right. Well, what
Yeah.
did you learn? I mean, from doing this research, what's your take on that?
I would say one of the biggest risks might be regulatory pushback. And I say it in a sense of specifically countries where governments might be more oppressive onto freedom of people, um like sort of the way people like how people feel security if they use it or not. So sort of like that fear of retaliation if they do use it. So I think that's like a significant risk, especially maybe not in like a macroeconomic sense, but more in like people level sense. Sort of like how does that look like in countries where people might not be free to, use the financial tools that they want to. Yeah.
Is it insurmountable? What are some answers to that last question?
Is it what?
What are some answers to the last question that you asked? Like the last question of what would it look like where people are not allowed to use it? Repression, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess it would depend a lot on the government, but like I guess people if there's like a big sense of fear,
Yeah.
people will just like not like stop using it. So like that happens in all aspects of like when people try to do something different than what the government like an oppressive government wants to. So I don't know if you guys saw, but like in Venezuela, like people who would protest during elections, they would literally get like an X mark on their houses. So like that's just like a sort of like this messages of fear. So I guess like obviously if there's like a sense of fear or that your life is in risk, people will just like stop using it. Because it's like saving your life, I guess. Yeah. What do you guys think?
Also, I think, I mean, there's several, right? Like we're very early in this, right? And as I think I've adopted Bitcoin. There's a cost to it for the perspective of folks that don't believe in it, that don't know what it is, that don't know, if you're very new at this, then you're like, why would I invest in something that seems to be growing, but I prefer to use fiat because despite, losing value every so many decades, fiat has been around for a while. So how do we change that? How do we influence how can we get more visionary leaders that can see or bet at least in this parts of the future like Bitcoin the way Bukele has done it? Like how do we get more of that open-mindedness within the very traditional structures of power particularly if it's very authoritarian, which is even harder, right? Um, and I think, just in general, at a nation state level, but even at an individual level in emerging markets, there could be a mismanagement of, and transaction fees that like the use, somebody, I believe, I'm not sure who did, but somebody mentioned the fact of the was it you? I think you mentioned something about the app, the wallet app. Anyways, somebody mentioned earlier that we might just not have the infrastructure to make payments right now as easy as stablecoins. You'll see. Okay. So, Bitcoin still has the interface can still be sharpened to make it very intuitive, very easy, and not just at the individual level, but also at a nation state level. Like, how do we buy at the nation state level? Let's not even do nation state level. How do companies in emerging markets can actually buy Bitcoin and then put them as part of their treasury, right? Like MicroStrategy is doing here with MicroSailor in the United States.
Mhm.
Do we have the interfaces for that? Do we have the custody options solutions for that? Then we get into the tax treatment,
Mhm.
right? There's like many different layers of friction, I think, that I think in due time are going to get better. They're going to smooth out. But for now, for emerging markets, we have the practicality of, the something as simple as transaction fees, right? That's a real challenges, particularly if you want to send remittances to El Salvador, which is, big part of El Salvador's GDP is remittances. Well, it adds up if I send you $10 and then I lose. Ideally, I don't want to lose it, right? Because I'm giving you my work to you in a different country. So there's all those nuances that with time, I do believe it will smooth out the way. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember, Alta Vista, Netscape. I mean, I'm dating myself here, but I'm old enough to remember those type of internet interfaces. Never in a million years, I would imagine a Google. Never. Well, here we are. Hey, ChatGPT blows my mind. So obviously, Bitcoin will get there in the user interface and the transaction fees and everything, but it will just take time and effort.
The thing is, so I was in Argentina a year ago when they got elected,
Amazing.
and so I had to change money and go to Western Union stores, and Western Union is just everywhere in Buenos Aires, but I believe in other.
Well, Salvador too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I cannot understand like Western Union taking so much fees and huge cuts on remittances. Like, why don't more people use blockchain technology and Bitcoin to send money? And it even could save time instead of gathering your cash, going to Western Union, and I feel like it's simpler to use blockchain. Still, people tend to do it gradually more, but not that much people do this. I feel.
I think Professor Krebs on her last 3 paragraphs, I think, or towards the end of her article mentioned just technology penetration, right? If the people are picking up those remittances of Western Union, if they're picking up $50 or $100, they probably will not have an iPhone. Probably will be a very low value Android. Like you,
Yeah.
What might seem nuanced for us here at Cornell and very easy might look very different for somebody that has to hop on the bus or walk to Western Union for a couple hours or take a bus, right? Right, there's sort of that nuance that Western Union has that infrastructure for decades to have to be everywhere, even in like small little towns. I'm sure Ecuador the same. I'm sure they're there. So that's, I think back to the original point, the infrastructure is just not there. And let's not even talk about that now. How do I get in to a lady from 65, 75-year-old lady that's going to pick up her remains, right? So that's sort of where we're thinking. But that's a good point.
Yeah.
Anyone else on friction? What's your frictions for adoption?
It's more like a question concern in general, and it's related to with the things we want to do with CTV. So I was just thinking, because it is, like if we look at like in the US right now, is it really beneficial for them to think about adopting Bitcoin because of how volatile it is? Because what they're thinking is that I'm going to pay my employees each month, and this Bitcoin thing that I have to take in, and then the price changes, and I have to go and pay my employees, the value changes. So my concern with is that, like for someone, for like an employer in the US, just like a business owner, is there really enough incentives for you to transition?
It's a great question. If we use MicroStrategy's corporate treasury playbook, the incentive is when you look at the data, Bitcoin is literally going up and to the right over since its inception, right? The huge volatility is necessary as it's a new asset class, right? So it's not a bug, it's actually a feature, right? So I think the conversation with the small business owners, and I'm a business owner myself, small business owner, is if this asset is appreciating and it's hard money that it's not going to be inflated away, could you start adopting it and keep that as part of your corporate treasury, if need be, just to get them some buy-in, right? To get them and they will show the data. Say, hey, no, listen, it's not us, but this is the data. This is sort of Bitcoin's appreciation. This is sort of what MicroStrategy is doing. This is why there's a case for Bitcoin as part of corporate treasury, right? And then we can show increasing using adoption rates of Bitcoin, increasing like all the good stuff, right? But in general, depending on where they are in the information ladder, you can meet them there. If they're like, oh, listen, we don't want to pay our employees, because it's like, okay, well, do you have some background on sort of how it appreciates and where we're going since Bitcoin's inception, and we can then start engaging and saying, will you be open to adopting or receiving it and keeping that, and just see what happens as time passes, right? Getting the buy-in. That is a good point, and that's actually a very reasonable sort of question you might get from them. And I think the best argument is just to meet them where they are in that information knowledge, because it's very normal. Right? It's like, all right, if I adopt it, doesn't mean you have to pay your employees with it right now. Just adopt it and see, dive deep into it and see how it can be a net positive for your corporate structure, so you can open more CTVs on you. Right, so that I would anticipate they will pass that. Sure.
Yeah, I feel like in the beginning it's almost accepting Bitcoin for kicks and giggles, and like there's some fun with accepting Bitcoin and paying your copy with Bitcoin being paid in Bitcoin. So maybe that's like the entry point to like beginning to deep dive into what does it entail really, what are the impacts, what does Bitcoin mean in itself. So I think like as many people begin to get interest in crypto thanks to the financial aspects and gambling perspective, I think that accepting Bitcoin through this fun point of view, right, could be a powerful tool.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Heard a lot of great points. But yeah, that would be it for today. And then hopefully you have a happy fall break, a relaxing one. Yeah.
Thank you, Rafa. Thank you for leading this. Truly amazing. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you. It was incredible. Thank you so much, Rafa. Have a good fall break, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Bye. See you.